What's going on, everybody? All right, I found this and I was like, I have to do it. I gotta do it right now because Signals. It's the record that we just finished, but literally in my current time right now, I literally just finished Grace Under Pressure. I just finished it. Listened to the whole thing once, right? And videoed it, all of it. But now, right now, what I want to do is I found this video of a radio interview from 1982 where they're talking about Signals. And I'm like, oh, I gotta, this is cool. I gotta check it out. So that's what we're checking out today. Rush Signals 1982 radio interview. If you're new here, please subscribe, check out my videos, all kinds of videos, reaction videos, bass videos, music videos, all kinds of videos. Check it out. In the description below, I got Amazon affiliate links to all things Rush, bass gear, music gear that I use, bio info in the description. Check it out. If you like the channel, if you want to support the channel, if you want to say thanks, you can hit super thanks underneath this video. You can hit me direct in the description. I got PayPal, Venmo, Amazon wishlist, mailing address, all kinds of ways. Check it out. Okay, this is a pretty long interview, so this is going to be a long video, but I really wanted to check it out because last week's video was Signals, and you guys just finished that. I'm going to put this out probably right after my overview, just as a surprise, and then tomorrow we'll start Grace Under Pressure. Yeah, which was very interesting for me. That was super interesting. Some surprises, some good, some bad, some yeah. I literally just finished listening to it, and it ended with a bang. Let's put it that way for me right now. For me, yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but yeah, it was interesting. Okay, but right now I want to check out this this radio interview, which is like 15 minutes long. So let's do this. Bam. Rush 1982 radio interview on the Signals recordings with Alex, Geddy, and Neil. Geddy Lee and Neil Peart talk about Subdivisions.
We found with moving pictures, everything went great, and we were real pleased with the sound of it. And we sort of accomplished a real, trio sound, big sound. And we were afraid of going in the studio and doing Moving Pictures Part 2. There was no sense in doing that. We didn't want to approach the recording from the same aspect. So a fundamental desire to want to shift the sound of the band on record led to what Signals is, which is in some ways almost a 4-piece band rather than a 3-piece.
Yeah. Subdivisions.
Yeah.
One of the most lasting and highest and most used things about our culture, and especially North American culture, is the suburbs. And we're products of the suburbs.
Yeah, it's a common background for each of us, and I kind of think it's a background for a lot of our audience too.
Yeah.
And it has, for all its blandness, and it's so easy to satirize, which is a trap I wanted to avoid. It's always been a constant stock joke or skit or something to satirize the suburbs and the mentality of it and all. And of course, it's just as diverse as people are, really, when you come down to it. But it has its own set of values and set of background parameters about it that are, as you say, are very much unique to this contemporary society.
Yeah. Talk about the analog kid. Okay. Very cool. And Neil is so damn smart. Shit.
Yeah, instead of having your basic heavy metal guitar sound, triple tracked or tracked 4 times or how many, I wanted to have one real present, ambient, nice guitar that just sat in a place. And, then get a keyboard sound that sat in a place and have, like the drum approach, the whole technique to recording drums was totally different this time. We wanted to approach everything from a real fresh and, I guess, somewhat experimental point of view.
Well, staying with the guitar playing just for a sec, the thing I noticed, you're talking about, okay, how, you recorded, but just what you're playing, to me, is radically different. The whole band, I think, has changed inside out, where I think a lot of, say, what you used to carry, Alex, in terms of guitar lines and stuff, you seem to be doing more with bass, keyboards, and voice. And it's almost like Neil and Alex are swirling around this foundation that you've created. And this, to me, is like real inside-out playing for Rush. And Alex is the best example of that.
Yeah, Alex and I are off in the rhythm section on some of these songs where Alex is actually playing what amounts to a bass part. And he and I are working off each other the way that Geddy and I often used to. And the keyboards become a dominant instrument. The guitar and I become the rhythm section, basically.
Okay, Analog Kid. Lyrically, this guy seems to be quite enthralled or almost ready to give himself over to this vision. There's a very much of a seduction.
Yeah, it's kind of that post-adolescent period I think you go through where everything but where you are seems to be larger than life, you know. Whether you're in the suburbs or a city or a small town or whatever, it all seems to be so gray, whereas when you talk about faraway places or you think about, you know, London, England, or Los Angeles or New York, these places seems to be totally removed from any of your experience, and they seem to be like literally larger than life, so such romantic things. And it's basically a picture of that vision, you know, of being in what you're used to and dreaming about what you're not used to.
Talk about chemistry. Okay.
This is the first album that we'd done after we'd had a long period of time off, and where we'd all done writing on our own. So a lot of what happened on this album was a coming together of individual ideas that people had sort of in mind for their own purposes. So when we put the things together, they were already ideas that we'd lived with for a long time in our own context, and sort of assembled them. And so from one aspect, you're talking about our own invention, where, you know, we all consciously sat down and tried to write something on our own. And then the other thing comes in where they accidentally all fall together into a whole different context than we'd ever imagined.
And also a lot of the other material that we used to fill the gaps, and just for other material, we got from sound checks, from the inspirational angle of it, of just coming in early in the day and playing for the fun of playing.
Chemistry is a good example of that, isn't it?
Yeah, the whole song was written in the sound check. And we had all these sound check tapes, and Alex and I sat down at home and put the song together. I mean, so the whole song was finished before we even got to play it for Neil.
Yeah.
I think it has a really strong emotional feel to it, but it's not a flashy million notes per hour kind of, which is a direction that I've tried to take for a long time. I feel a lot more comfortable with a little more melody, a little more feel.
There's an example of something you can do at the studio because it's in the country that you couldn't do in the city. For his solo, we put all the amps outside, aimed them at the mountains, and he recorded a solo outside, so that echo off it. That's something we've done before, but never on a raging lead solo. So the echo was all natural, and it had a real special sound to it.
Took a couple of days to achieve that, but it was well worth it.
It's great, because here's this huge Marshall stack outside, aimed at the lake and the hills, and you could be back at the house while he's working on his solo, and you can hear his solo raging around.
Digital Man?
Digital Man. I think perhaps one of the most musically interesting songs on the album. Certainly, again, we talk about swirling effects and a lot of different things happening above and below the surface. That sounds like a lot of different things happening at once, or a couple of different ideas sort of colliding together at once.
Colliding is a good word.
That was the mishmash approach to trying to take diverse influences and make them work together. It starts out basically as a hard rock trio, then goes into a ska or reggae style rhythmic approach, and then has sort of a modern contemporary European approach to the sequencer chorus, and then goes right back down to a basic trio again for the instrumental section, and then builds up through the changes again. It's all very confused.
Yeah, it's all very confusing to me too.
See, actually,
we spent so much time working on that and trying to get it to feel right, and for the longest time we had no faith in the song, and all of a sudden it just blossomed. And now for me it's one of my favorite songs in the album.
Yeah, it is.
Just works great. It was a battle to get all these influences to feel natural somehow, to feel like they worked. It was like fighting the machines around you for days, and then eventually it just came together.
The Weapon?
We sort of had tentative plans about possibly thinking about maybe one day looking at doing solo projects, and we both had written a fair bit of material on our own. Consequently, when we got together to write this album, we had all this piles and piles of material that we just pieced together.
We made a suit instead.
well, I think a classic example of something like that is The Weapon, the song The Weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a classic case of man versus machine. Neil versus Roland drum synthesizer. Who won, Neil?
That's right. Roland.
What happened? Explain exactly.
Well, just when Getty and his friend Oscar had been working together on actually what became basically the chorus of the song. And Oscar had made up this ridiculous drum beat on the Roland drum machine that had all kinds of strange offbeats in it and stuff. And Getty had used that to make his demo that he played for us as being some ideas that he'd worked on at home. And listening to the drum beat, it sounded totally impossible to play because it was things that aren't physically normally done. So I decided, though, that I did want to try to mimic it because it was a really interesting and unusual rhythm. So I just sat down and tried to learn it and ended up using my left hand to do things that my right hand would normally do, and just playing sort of backwards to try and copy it. It's a very interesting thing to do, learn from a machine.
Yeah, it's a great song. New World Band.
The song called The Weapon, it's labeled as Part 2 of Fear. Now, Witch Hunt was Part 3 of Fear.
Right.
I never saw Part 1. And where's this thing going, or where did it start, or where is it coming from, or what's it about?
No, this is part 4, isn't it? Where's part 1?
Well, actually, I mean, that was my question.
Make up your minds. Oh, I don't know.
Flynn is a great second
I mean, they
baseman,
seem like
isn't he?
displaced chapters of a
Yes.
story.
Yeah, well, I just had 3 individual ideas that all related to that common theme. And it just happened that the first one to be written was Witch Hunt, which I had always in mind as being the third part of this little thematic piece. So I saw nothing wrong really with using it a piece at a time. And eventually part 1 may or may not ever appear. I've learned better and more concise ways of expressing myself using fewer words more accurately, and learning more of the exact meanings of words and how to use less syllables more effectively rhythmically, so you can have a short line that seems to say or does say a lot more than the words would seem to convey.
That taken too, but just with what your lyrics are
Yeah.
saying, to me, when I hear lyrics off the Signals album, I relate to them emotionally now, where before you're more observing it.
Okay.
For instance, New World Man is a classic example. I mean, that song, for me, hits a bit close to home. It's almost embarrassing for me to read because I see myself in that song. And that's
Interesting.
never happened in a Rush song for me, and I know I'm not alone.
Yeah, well, that's
So
good.
even on that level
That's
too,
interesting.
again, it's not a matter of some guy oppressed by society in 2112.
Sure, okay.
You're talking about me.
Yeah,
For me, and a lot of Neil's lyrics on this album, there's a pulse that runs through almost every song that relates to a present sort of reality, and a present situation that that maybe we all have gone through at some point, in the growing up stage or in the stage that we find ourselves at now. But there's a real sort of link to today.
Oh,
and a lot of-
very timely contemporary feel. Which, again, is this just a matter of you developing new tools?
yeah,
or-
I think so. It's not something that I consciously sat down and said, I want to write about modern times, but it certainly did develop that way, and I think my input in terms of what I've been reading and so on has been more concerned with the present day, or with this century at least, than with a timeless, fantastic approach, or with futuristic or whatever.
Fantasy is what I labeled down.
Yeah, there's been much less of that in terms of my reading, and much more of the 20th century approach to writing, which has been either realistic or romantically naturalistic, slightly idealized reality, which is what appeals to me the most.
Losing it.
I think myself, in the sort of whole rhythm of the band, it's an extension of something we started a couple albums ago, which is an emphasis on feel, and being able to take all the technique that you have and apply it subtly into the feel of a song, and put the emphasis feel first, technique second, rather than the way it used to be, is technique for the sake of technique. So because the technique was good, therefore the song was good. Well, that does not equate anymore. Now it has to feel real good, and the technique has to be part of that feel. And I think that's the most, the most obvious change.
A lot of the playing on Signals, to me, deals with, instead of blatant telling of facts and things, either lyrically or musically, you're dealing with suggestion and implication. When, Alex, when you play these days, you don't so much play a note as much as imply a whole bunch by playing one.
Yeah, I think that comes with confidence and maturity in all of our cases, and that relates to my drumming too, where Getty was saying about the period before where technique was almost the end as well as the means, because we were trying to prove ourselves to ourselves and to our audience, and to anybody that was interested, that we were improving and that we were interested in being good, and look, we can do this to ourselves, and just trying to grow and trying to develop all the skills that we looked around at other bands and other musicians and admired, wanted to live up to and wanted to grow up to. And now we've reached the point where I think we have a certain amount of confidence in what we can do, know what we can't do to steer away from, and consequently can sit back a bit and carefully space things out. So a guitar solo can be more predominantly melody than a display of notes. Or if I look at a drum fill, sometimes it can be just for what will work rhythmically rather than what I want to show off this week.
I think the key word is confidence.
Yeah.
I think in your early stages of being a band or musician or whatever, you don't have the confidence, so you have a tendency to overstate things, you know, to over-dramatize things. And the more confidence that you get in what you're doing, you realize that the effect can be just as much, if not more, by, as you say, implying what you mean, or restraining at a point where maybe 2 years ago we would bang you over the head, you know, we pull back, we ease back on the gas pedal at that point, you know, to have a little more depth to what's going on.
Countdown.
Song Countdown. Now here's a song of real personal experience as opposed to leaping out of your fertile imagination and painting a very graphic scene.
We were there to experience one of the greatest things that anyone could experience, and that's the launching of the Columbia space shuttle. And that song is just very simply a description of what we experienced. And we just tried to pay some homage to it, really.
It's interesting stylistically, too, in that we have kind of a foot in our past there in the way that we presented it musically. It has a kind of cinematic approach, which is something that we have dealt with in the past, but usually in expressing a fantasy or an imaginary situation. And this time we used that style, which we basically left behind in most other cases, but we brought it up for this, for a very real thing and very journalistic style of lyrics this time, instead of being a fantastic situation or, you know, a science fiction idea or something.
Okay.
Yeah, it's true. It really relates to the structure of songs like Cygnus.
Cool. Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, that was super cool. That was super cool to hear. Freaking, oh man. When I hear Neil talk, I'm just like, oh man. It's too bad that guy's gone. I'm like catching these guys now, and I'm like, oh man. Yeah, just incredible. I mean, yeah, just his, like, you know, it just speaks volumes to reading. You know, like how he speaks and his lyrics and all that, like it just speaks volumes to reading books. Reading books, right? I'm not much of a reader myself, but, you know, I understand where it comes from, at least. Anyways, this video is not about me. Yeah, that was very cool. I'm glad we listened to that. Glad we checked that out. Very cool. A little bit of a insight into where they were at that time period when Signals came out. So that's amazing. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Grace Under Pressure. See you then.